Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. If you're like me, you got sober because someone or something in your life was disturbed by your alcohol or drug use. Maybe it was a relationship with someone who was important to you. Maybe it was that you had gotten in trouble of some sort. You were not doing what you should have been doing at your job, or you had gotten in trouble with the law. We typically get sober for reasons that are outside of ourselves. But one of the most important things about a journey of recovery is learning to live with ourselves and to be comfortable with ourselves. So once we start this journey, once we get the physical sobriety taken care of, we start to see that it's really important to learn how to live with ourselves and to be friends with ourselves as part of this overall recovery journey and as part of a program of spiritual wellness. So I can't put it much better than Chuck C does in A New Pair of Glasses. So I'm going to read what he has to say about this and then talk about it for a couple of minutes. So Chuck C starts by saying, everything else in life you can change. You don't even have to go home from here if you don't want to. You can go someplace else. You don't ever have to see your wife again if you don't want to. You never have to see your kids again if you don't want to. You don't have to stay in California. You don't have to stay in the United States. You can change everything in life but one thing. You can't get away from you. You're stuck with you forever. I'm stuck with me forever. Now, you would think that when we arrive in this world, they would try to teach us how to be friends with ourselves, but they don't. They teach us we have to work with other people. Be sure that we make a good impression on the neighbors and the people around us. We have to show respect to our elders, particularly the priest and the preacher and the mother-in-law. But they don't tell us how to get along with us, how to become friends with ourselves. Now, I'll stop right there and say that I find a lot of truth in that. And as a parent, I feel like I have probably done a poor job of helping my son learn how to be a friend to himself. We don't typically address that part of life unless someone's having a problem with it, unless someone's beating themselves up too much for problems they have, or they seem to lack some kind of self-control and that needs attention. So we don't really think much about being friends to ourselves, about being nice to ourselves until we're not doing it, until there's a problem with it. So that really stood out to me when I was reading this morning, and I needed to hear it because I haven't been very nice to myself over the past few days, and it's put me in a very weird place mentally. And I think I need to slow down and give myself a little bit of a break so that I don't get stressed out and start worrying about things that really are outside of my control. So Chuck C goes on to say, in my opinion, the definition of sobriety is the ability to live comfortably, peacefully, and joyously with me. This is sobriety, and anything short of it is partial sobriety. So a lot of us, when we come into sobriety, when we come into recovery, our real goal is, how do I stop using? How do I stop drinking? And the big reason is that so many of the problems in our lives, we are taking back to the drugs and the alcohol. And we say, well, if I could just stop this thing, then I wouldn't have XYZ problems. And what we find is that physical sobriety from drugs and alcohol is necessary for those changes to take place, but the kind of changes that really are going to relieve some of these problems that brought us to recovery are not just related to abstinence from drugs and alcohol. We have to go through some spiritual work and transformation in order for those things to really get addressed. So Chuck C goes on to say, Physical sobriety is absolutely important. To me, it's synonymous with life. I cannot live and drink, and of myself, I can't keep from drinking. So I have to be physically sober lest I die. I'm not selling physical sobriety short. It's the foundation under sobriety. But sobriety is physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. Four parts of the same thing, and it adds up to the ability to live comfortably, peacefully, and joyously with me. This is sobriety. So I think it's really important. It's been really important for me to grasp this. I quit drinking over 4 years ago without doing any kind of program of recovery. And I had some interest in doing things that later I identified as things that I was attracted to, things like volunteering, like reading some self-help books that were geared toward self-improvement, that were geared toward spiritual wellness. So I had those kinds of desires, but I didn't really follow through on them that long. And pretty soon, all of the things that were driving my problems when I was drinking came back. They reared their ugly heads again. I was still smoking pot, and at that time, I got heavily into that activity, and pretty soon, my patterns with using that drug looked exactly like what I was doing drinking, and before long, my entire existence looked pretty much just the same as it did when I was drinking. So even though I didn't have any alcohol in my life, I was basically acting the same way I did when I had alcohol. And so I was physically sober from alcohol, but I wasn't mentally, emotionally, or spiritually well. I wasn't addressing the underlying issues that really needed to be addressed in order to get me to that place. So when people talk about the AA program being, for example, I read an article the other day that really had a lot of bad things to say about the AA program. And I'll be the first to admit there are some legitimate arguments about antiquated ideas, and there are legitimate issues with the AA program, the way it has worked in some situations. Uh, that being said, the reason a program like that is so important is that it recognizes the need to address factors outside of just physical sobriety. It recognizes the contribution that addressing mental, emotional, and spiritual sobriety has to achieving long-term recovery from this condition, from this disorder. The fact is, if we can address those kinds of issues for people some way, their success at long-term recovery is much higher. And their satisfaction with life is often much higher. So that's why, to me, it's so important to not only address the physical sobriety aspect of things, but also look at the spiritual side, because it's by looking at the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual side that I'm actually finally learning to be a friend to myself. And as much as people tried to help me figure that out along the way, my parents, my psychiatrists, therapists, people from church, friends, it's only through working a spiritual program of recovery that I'm really starting to learn what it means to be a friend to myself. And that is what is helping me find joy, peace, and comfort in my sobriety. That's it for today. I'll be back here tomorrow with more. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, be good to yourselves, and take care of your recovery.